A quiet farm, a sudden shriek, blood on the ground where a creature once stood. Legends say it's the Chupacabra, a beast that feeds in the night. If you dare to know more, keep watching, because each story leaves a scar on those who survive. Deep in the countryside, a young boy named Marcos lived in a small town where nights seemed to stretch on forever. He loved to explore the wide fields behind his home, especially when the sunset painted the sky with shades of orange and purple. Sometimes he heard coyotes howl far away. Their cries sent a jolt of excitement through him. Still, he never knew real fear until the night he spotted a shape lurking by the chicken coop. It was a chilly evening. Marcos had finished his homework and stepped outside to gaze at the stars. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the silence. At first, he thought a wounded animal had wandered onto the property. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen, he ran back outside. He aimed the beam toward the coop and saw a hunched figure with glowing red eyes. It moved with unnatural speed, disappearing into the tall grass. All that remained were strange round footprints in the dirt. He raced inside to wake his mother, who had just dozed off on the couch. Breathless, he explained what he saw. She recalled rumors of a beast called the Chupacabra, a creature said to drain animals of their blood. Marcos was unsure if these stories were real or just scary tales, but the shrill cry he heard felt too real to ignore. Later that night, he struggled to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those terrible red eyes glaring back. In the early morning light, he went out to check on the chickens. 2 of the biggest hens were missing. Feathers and a thin line of blood led away from the coop, where the fence was bent. Marcos felt a surge of dread. The footprints he found were like nothing he had seen before. They were round, with 3 claw marks at the front. Determined to protect his remaining chickens, Marcos set up a small hiding spot near the coop that evening. He found an old crate and propped it against the fence. Armed with a sturdy wooden bat and a bright flashlight, he kept watch. Hours passed, and the only sounds were the chirping crickets and an occasional owl hooting in the distance. Just as he began to relax, a low growl drifted through the darkness. From behind the coop, a shadow emerged, crouched low to the ground. The beast had scaly skin with spines down its back. Its eyes glowed like hot embers. Marcos's heart pounded as he flicked on the flashlight. The beam caught the creature's face, revealing a snarl and sharp fangs. A foul smell hit Marcos, reminding him of wet fur and rotten meat. The Chupacabra hissed in warning and lunged forward. Wire tore under its claws like paper, and terrified squawks erupted from the chickens. Marcos yelled for his mother, but the creature darted away, leaving destruction behind. The following morning, the townspeople gathered to see the shredded fence and the odd footprints. While some believed the old legends, others shook their heads and muttered about wild dogs. Nobody knew how to stop the attacks, and fear settled over the town like a thick fog. Marcos's mother decided it was too risky to stay another night. They loaded a few suitcases into their truck and drove off to his aunt's house, which was a fair distance away. The journey felt longer than usual. Every rustle of leaves made Marcos jump. As they rounded a bend in the road, something dashed out of the shadows. Red eyes glared for a split second, then the shape vanished. Marcos's mother swerved, barely avoiding a crash. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she pressed the gas, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever lurked in the night. When they finally reached the aunt's home, they locked every window and door. The aunt was already on edge. She'd heard stories of missing goats in the area. Each attack left behind nothing but blood and the same round footprints. Locals tried setting up traps, motion-sensing lights, and even guard dogs. Yet each morning, the animals still vanished. Fear had spread through the region. Late that night, Marcos couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the wind pushing branches against the house. Around midnight, he heard a horrible screech echo through the trees. He tiptoed to the window and peeked outside. Moonlight revealed a shape creeping toward a pen of goats. Their bleating cries shattered the quiet. The Chupacabra leaped in a blur of motion, sinking its teeth into one of the animals. Blood sprayed across the pen as the beast fed. Marcos felt his stomach twist with horror. He wanted to look away, but he was frozen by fear. His mother and aunt joined him, staring through the window in shock. They dared not open the door. The creature raised its head as if sensing their eyes upon it. Its jaws dripped with dark fluid before it turned and bounded away into the night. The next morning, authorities came to investigate. They found the mangled remains of the goats, but no solid evidence to prove a monster was responsible. Neighbors with rifles promised to hunt down the culprit. Still, many doubted a creature like the Chupacabra could be real. Determined to keep Marcos safe, his mother insisted they leave. They bid a worried farewell to the aunt, who also planned to depart in search of safer ground. And the worst part was knowing that he might never outrun the creature's deadly gaze. On their way out of town, Marcos and his mother felt the weight of dread growing heavier. In every quiet moment, Marcos imagined the beast trailing them, hiding in the darkness. He kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to spot those glowing eyes. Though the miles added up, the echo of that haunting screech still rang in his ears. Each night brought new nightmares, and each day felt no safer than the last. The Chupacabra had already left its mark on his soul, and he feared it would never fade. In a forgotten desert town called Mesilla, an old farmer named Ignacio lived by himself in a shack made of sun-baked clay. He had arrived decades ago, seeking a quiet life after roaming from place to place. His only companions were a handful of goats, which provided milk and a sense of purpose in the lonely stretch of land. Each evening, Ignacio fed his goats before watching the sunset coat the desert sands in deep red hues. One night, a piercing shriek shattered the stillness. Ignacio jumped from his wooden chair, nearly dropping his bowl of stew. The goats bleated in panic, their cries echoing across the empty desert. Heart pounding, he grabbed a lantern and hurried outside. In the flickering light, he noticed the goats huddled together as though terror had taken hold of them. Their eyes were wide, and their ears twitched at every sound. At first, he saw nothing but the pale desert sands under the moon. Yet an odd smell hung in the air, a thick, musty odor he had never encountered before. Then, he spotted a line of strange, round tracks leading away from his goats toward a ridge of rocks. The footprints were spaced out as if made by something that leaped rather than walked. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had heard legends of a terrifying creature that roamed the desert at night, always hungry for blood. Determined to protect his goats, Ignacio retrieved an old rifle from a dusty trunk inside his shack. He stood guard by the pen until the sun rose. Nothing disturbed the peace again, but he couldn't shake the memory of that awful screech. The following day, he patched any gaps in the fence and spent hours reinforcing the gate. Though he was aging, he refused to be helpless in the face of danger. The night after, Ignacio was awakened by a sharp cry once more. Stumbling into his boots, he rushed outside with his rifle. To his horror, two goats lay sprawled on the ground, their bodies lifeless. Blood stained the dirt, and the other goats were cowering at the far end of the pen. The fence was torn. Something had smashed through the wood as if it were brittle straw. Ignacio's trembling hands gripped the rifle. He scanned the darkness, but all he saw were those strange tracks leading off toward the rocky ridge. Fear gnawed at him, but anger flared too. His goats were all he had in this lonely place. He had heard gossip of the Chupacabra from traveling merchants who passed through Mesilla. They spoke of red eyes, sharp spines, and a thirst for blood that drove the creature to attack livestock. Ignacio realized the legend might have come to life in his very yard. He decided to hunt the monster. At dusk, he prepared a simple trap. He placed one goat in a smaller pen behind the shack, hoping to draw the beast close. He piled crates to hide behind, rifle at the ready. The night sky sparkled with stars, but the air felt heavy with dread. Time seemed to slow as Ignacio listened for the slightest noise. Just past midnight, the goat in the small pen bleated in alarm. Ignacio watched a tall, dark silhouette slip into the pen. It moved with uncanny speed, jumping over the low fence in one quick bound. Moonlight revealed its leathery skin, bent legs, and curved spines along its back. The goat let out a terrified cry, and Ignacio saw the creature's eyes glow a vivid red. Its jaws parted, fangs dripping with saliva. Mustering his courage, Ignacio steadied his rifle and took aim. The blast shattered the quiet. He ventured out, determined to confront the monster one final time. The night air felt cold against his skin, and each step crunched on the loose gravel. His lantern illuminated a faint trail of footprints that zigzagged between the boulders. He followed them deeper into the ridge. The shadows grew thick, and he worried the beast might ambush him. Still, he pressed on. At last, he came upon a small cave entrance hidden by tangled shrubs. Foul air wafted out, making Ignacio gag. He steadied his lantern and stepped inside. Bones littered the floor, some small like goat bones, others larger and unrecognizable. A chill ran through his body as he realized what this place was: the Chupacabra's lair. He heard a rustle in the darkness ahead. The lantern's glow fell upon two red eyes staring straight at him. The Chupacabra stood near the cave wall, hunched and snarling. Dried blood clung to its spines. Ignacio lifted his rifle, hands shaking. Before he could pull the trigger, the creature lunged. Its claws tore at his arm, knocking the lantern aside. Darkness swallowed everything. A scream tore from Ignacio's throat. He fired blindly, the gun's flash illuminating a leathery face inches from his own. The shot grazed the creature, causing it to howl in pain. The echo of the sound bounced around the cave. Ignacio scrambled backward, his back hitting the rough stone wall. The Chupacabra's eyes glowed in the flicker of dying lantern light. He squeezed the trigger again, but the rifle clicked. A jam. With a fierce hiss, the beast sprang, pinning Ignacio against the rock. Its fangs snapped at his neck. Desperate, he kicked and fought, feeling the creature's hot breath on his skin. He managed to grab a sharp stone from the cave floor, slashing at the monster's throat. It recoiled just enough for him to slip free. Drenched in sweat, Ignacio stumbled toward the exit, clutching his wounded arm. He could hear the beast's ragged breathing echo in the cramped space. With trembling hands, he cleared the jam and turned to face the monster once more. The Chupacabra charged. Ignacio fired. The thunderous blast erupted in the tiny cave, and the creature collapsed, a final rasp escaping its mouth. Panting, the old farmer fell to his knees. Blood trickled from cuts on his arm, and his breath came in ragged gasps. For a long moment, he stayed there, listening to his own heartbeat pound in his ears. The smell of death filled the cave, and a numbness settled over him. Finally, he pushed himself to his feet, limping out into the moonlit desert. Ignacio would live another day, but the memory of the creature's feral eyes would never leave him. The cave, filled with bones and a foul stench, told him that the Chupacabra was not a mere myth. It was real, and it had nearly claimed him as its final victim, though been his peace of mind. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the echo of that vicious roar. Far off in the misty hills of a tropical island, a teenage girl named Sofia lived with her grandfather. Their small wooden house perched on a slope, surrounded by banana trees and winding vines. Each morning, Sofia rose early to help her grandfather tend to their small herd of goats. She learned how to milk them and feed them fresh leaves from the forest. Life was peaceful. Yet old stories of supernatural creatures often floated around campfires at night. One humid evening, when the moon hung low, Sofia wandered into the forest to gather kindling. The crickets sang in harmony, and the leaves rustled gently overhead. But as she scooped up sticks, she sensed an unusual stillness nearby. The chirping crickets fell silent, and a foul odor wafted through the air, causing her to wrinkle her nose. It smelled like a mix of wet fur and rotting meat. She heard a sharp hiss behind her. Heart pounding, she spun around. At first, she saw nothing but dark silhouettes of trees. Then, a flash of movement caught her eye. A creature crouched behind a thick trunk, its eyes glowing faintly. Sofia's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of the Chupacabra. The older folks said it preyed on animals under the cover of night, but she never imagined it could be lurking so close. Fearing for her goats and her own safety, Sofia hurried back home, her bundle of sticks forgotten. She told her grandfather about the eerie shape in the woods. Though he tried to brush it off, a glimmer of concern flickered across his face. He checked the goat's pen that night, making sure the fence was secure. Before bed, he said a short prayer, asking for protection from dark spirits. The following day, Sofia decided to gather more information. She spoke with a neighbor who claimed to have lost 2 chickens the week before. Feathers and blood were all that remained, along with strange footprints in the mud. Another neighbor mentioned hearing hissing at night, but refused to leave her home after dark. Rumors swirled around the tiny village, but nobody had solid proof of what was out there. Late that night, Sophia woke to the sound of panicked bleating. She and her grandfather scrambled outside, armed with a flashlight and a thick wooden staff. The glow of the lantern revealed a horrifying sight. A dark shape clung to one of the goats, its jaws fastened around the animal's neck. The goat kicked in terror, but the beast held tight, sucking blood through razor-sharp teeth. Sophia's grandfather struck the creature with the staff, and it hissed, letting go of the goat. Its eyes blazed red in the lantern's glow before it darted into the woods. They tended to the wounded goat, but it was too late. The poor animal's body had gone limp, blood staining its pale fur. Sophia's grandfather gently covered it with a blanket, sorrow washing over his wrinkled face. In the morning, word spread through the village. Some tried to dismiss it as a wild dog attack, but others whispered about the Chupacabra, the legendary terror they had hoped was only myth. The following evening, Sophia set her trap. She hung the fishing nets around the pen, attaching them to tall poles that were staked into the ground. If the Chupacabra tried to jump over the fence, it might get tangled in the net. Everyone waited in tense silence as the hours dragged on. Midnight came and went with no sign of the creature. Then, just before dawn, a sudden snarling erupted. Rushing outside, Sophia saw the net shaking wildly. Dark claws tore at the cords, trying to break free. She caught a glimpse of the Chupacabra's furious red eyes. Its spines bristled as it hissed and snapped. The villagers, awakened by the commotion, grabbed ropes and machetes. The creature lunged at the fence, ripping a hole through the net. Panicked cries filled the air as it nearly clawed its way out. Desperate, Sophia's grandfather threw a heavy fishing net over the hole, slowing it down. Another villager looped a rope around the beast's neck from a safe distance, pulling tight. Fury shone in the Chupacabra's eyes. It fought with savage strength, yanking people off their feet. Lobo barked fiercely, lunging at the creature, only to be swatted aside. Blood splattered the ground as the beast clawed at the net and rope. Sophia's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She knew they could not keep it trapped for long. One slash of its claws, and the nets would tear apart. In a final, desperate attempt, a group of villagers rushed forward with thick blankets, smothering the creature's head and body. The ropes tightened. Finally, the thrashing slowed, though the beast still growled beneath the layers of cloth. No one dared remove the blankets to see its face. They knew any mistake could be fatal. But the victory offered no comfort. The beast's body lay twitching beneath the blankets, and an uneasy hush fell over the gathering crowd. Some insisted on destroying it, while others wondered if there were more out there. Sophia felt no triumph in subduing the creature. All she could think of was her lost goat and the terror that had gripped her home. Without warning, the Chupacabra gave one last violent jerk. The rope snapped, and the creature broke free, tearing through the netting. Bloodied and enraged, it lunged at the nearest villager, its jaws snapping shut on the man's arm. Screams ripped through the early dawn air. The crowd scattered in panic. Sophia's grandfather tried to help, but the thrashing monster knocked him aside, sending him tumbling to the ground. Lobo, with a final burst of courage, lunged at the Chupacabra, biting down on its leg. Snarling, the beast whipped around, throwing the dog off. Then, in a blur of speed, it dashed into the forest, its growls echoing behind. People rushed to aid the wounded man, pressing cloth to the deep gashes in his arm. Sophia, shaken to her core, could only stare at the blood-stained ground. In the days that followed, fear hung over the village like a storm cloud. The wounded man's recovery was slow. Lobo limped, whimpering in pain. More patrols were organized, but the creature remained elusive. Though many villagers wished to flee, they had nowhere else to go. Life carried on in uneasy silence. Sophia never forgot the sight of the beast breaking loose and vanishing into the trees. She could still feel the thudding of her heart, the rawness of her screams echoing in her ears. Even as the island's forests grew lush and green, the darkness that dwelled within them felt more menacing than ever. Some nights she swore she heard a distant hiss, carried on the humid breeze, reminding her that the Chupacabra was still out there, waiting and watching from the shadows. Sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't just stories. They creep through dark forests, desert caves, and quiet farms, leaving blood and fear in their wake. Whether it's a boy who never sleeps soundly again, an old farmer haunted by red eyes in a cave, or a teenage girl who swears she hears hissing in the wind, each has felt the terror of the Chupacabra. And now, so have you.